Welcome to Fertility Cafe, the home for every conversation exploring alternative family building through IVF, surrogacy, egg, sperm, and embryo donation. Our host, Eloise Drain, alternates episodes between educational shows covering specific topics and guest narratives for further insight. For a mastery, understanding, and confidence in all things alternative family, subscribe to Fertility Cafe.
Hey there, welcome to episode 91 of Fertility Cafe. In this episode, we'll be talking about what it's like finding out you are faced with infertility, including what it's like processing that information and moving forward seeking answers in treatment. The industry talks a lot about IVF, egg donation, and surrogacy as a means to the end goal of having a family. But many people skip over one of the hardest parts in the process, learning that you have infertility issues. Rather than allowing individuals and couples the time, space, and compassion to fully process this information, most professionals charge right ahead into solutions, options, and next steps. But what is the real toll of finding out you have infertility issues? How do you adjust mentally, emotionally, and socially within your family and friend groups? How does it affect your identity, self-worth, and vision for your life? My guest on today's show is a relationship expert who inadvertently also became an infertility expert. Andrea Syrtash is the founder of Pregnantish, the first media platform dedicated to helping people navigate fertility treatments and infertility. A regular on-air personality and the host of Pregnantish podcast, Andrea's hosted TV shows for Oprah's Own, Discovery, and Fox, and is the author of He's Just Not Your Type, and That's a Good Thing, and Cheat on Your Husband with Your Husband. I love her relatable relationship writing, and I think it's fantastic that Andrea is committed to breaking the taboo of infertility and elevating the conversation about what it takes for so many people out there to start a family. So I'm very excited to welcome Andrea to the show today. Andrea, it is so great to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here and talk to you again. It's been a while.
It definitely has. So first, I'd love to start with your story. And if you don't mind sharing a little bit about your journey.
Absolutely. I usually joke when someone asks me, how long is your show? Because it was, the short version-ish, 8 years to baby, about 18 fertility treatments, lots of meds and shots, but even more Kleenex as it was heartbreaking. And I became a mother thanks to my first cousin, Alana, who was my angel on earth as my gestational surrogate in year 8. And now I have a 4-year-old named Ariel, who's my pride and joy. And she was frozen in time for a couple years waiting for a healthy uterus to bring her into the world.
Wow. So would you mind kind of sharing your story a little bit? I mean, I know that you had to endure a lot, which I know also impacts your body and your mind and all of the things. So would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
My background, you may not know, I'm a relationships author, and I've spent my whole career helping people navigate relationship challenges. And I always say infertility is the biggest relationship challenge you never knew you'd have. When sex does not make baby, and it doesn't for a lot of people, it impacts every single thing, your body, your bank account, your mental health, everything. And it's a marathon, of course. I had many times, I always give the image of the fertility treatment patient. You're running on this marathon, but within a real marathon, you know where the finish line is. And in this marathon, you just keep running and you fall over exhausted, you dust yourself off, you're bruised, you keep running, and it's exhausting. And when you don't know where that finish line is, it's really hard sometimes to keep running. So that's how I describe it. I, though, often say to our audience at Pregnantish, I really believe that year 6 was easier for me than year 1 or 2 of the struggle to conceive, because after a few years of it, I started to open up to the possibility of it may not be my body, it may not be my egg. In the end, it was my egg and my husband's sperm. It was not my body who carried the baby. But
Mhm.
I didn't even think like that in the first couple of years of trying. It
Mm.
was kind of like when sex did not make baby, I thought IUI was the answer. Then I thought IVF was the answer. And every roadblock just kept coming in front of us. And it was exhausting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And you, along the way, dealt with several pregnancy losses. And I know it's not something that society really talks about. And it's something that's still very taboo and hush hush. So, what would you share on that in your perspective on even for someone that is and has dealt with pregnancy loss?
It doesn't help that it's common, actually. It's very painful to share that it's common, that too many people are suffering this devastating experience is really sad. But I share that to say you are so not alone. And what one thing that I realized, and both through pregnancy loss and even embryo transfer loss, was devastating after spending
Mm.
sometimes, saving for the treatment, putting everything into that. And then that was an extreme loss as well. But I started to really get to this point, and there was a lot of grief for babies I hadn't met, but I knew I loved, where I had to find rituals at that time to honor those babies, those beings, those things that I loved that I never met, but that were deep inside of me and my heart. And I'll never forget in year 6 of this process, someone suggested I light a candle for every baby I thought I'd meet in the 6 years. My bedroom was full of light
Oh
and
my God.
candles. And it was a very powerful image because I looked around and it was so beautiful and so heartbreaking. And I said a wish, a prayer, sent love and said, there's a lot of love in this room, but I'm going to move on and meet my baby. And it's not you, but I love you. I just said my own little
Mhm.
message.
Mhm.
And that was very cathartic as a ritual because it allowed me to grieve, to create the space to grieve, because life just keeps moving fast and you're not talking about it with your boss or your friends all the time or at a dinner party. It's like,
Right.
but you need somewhere to release this grief.
Yep.
So creating those moments, sometimes I always tell our audience at Pregnantish too, like whatever you can do to hold the space to honor the babies you love but didn't meet is a great thing. It's
Mhm.
important.
Mhm. And it sounds like you were definitely bound and determined to have a baby. So, let's talk about your cousin who became your gestational surrogate and how that came about.
Well, again, the short version, because once we knew in year 5 or 6, a doctor said, "Stop using your embryos. I think you're making good embryos, and until we genetically test them, we can't tell if it's your uterus or the egg or the sperm. Let's just test the embryos." Once we tested and we had healthy embryos, that's when he said, "Go to surrogacy." And I was like,
Mm.
"Oh, easy. That's what we needed." Nothing's easy about that, as you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we had a couple years of bad hiccups with it's one agency I won't mention. That's not a one I would recommend. We had 2 people leave us, and one left us at a very late stage after we had negotiated the terms, 5 months of working with this GC to align, sending her kid birthday gifts and in touch. We had a relationship, and I to this day, she ghosted me. I don't know what happened. Our transfer is coming up and we're waiting for the last, signature on the legal paperwork, and all the medical tests have been done, everything had been done, and to this day I don't know where she is. And I wish her well, but it felt like another miscarriage.
Oh my gosh.
So my cousin who sent me a New Year's message in early January 2018. "Hey, happy New Year. How are you doing?" I'm like, "Do you want to know the truth? I can't get out of bed. This woman's left me and I'm
Mm.
exhausted already. I can't go through this anymore." Actually, I told her husband this and he told his wife, my cousin, "Oh my goodness, Andrea's GC just disappeared." And my cousin texted me that night and said, "Have you ever thought of a family member to help?" And that's how this all started. I would never have asked her. I
Mm.
would never have imagined she would have offered. She's an amazing person, but like I would never have asked someone to do this for us. She was compelled to offer, and that's when my life changed overnight.
But I hear so many people say I would never ask anybody, but I think sometimes though you take that ability from somebody, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to come right out and ask, right?
Mhm,
But I think also being able to give someone that ability to say, "Hey, I'm willing to
mhm,
do this for you," even though you may not come out and say you're asking, but at least the fact that you were willing to share your story and you were truthful with how you were actually feeling and knowing that that was such a significant loss. And I think the other point to your story as well is even though you match and even though you think that everything is in line and everything is going to happen, sometimes it doesn't.
mhm. And that's an undertold story of this journey for both intended parents and carriers and donors. Like nothing is a straight line when you're creating babies and families through science and technology and
Mhm.
humans. Like
Mhm.
nothing is
Mhm.
a straight line. And that's why we call it pregnant-ish. There's a lot of ish. There's a lot of
Yeah.
magic in the ish, I always say. Like there really is, because the unexpected can be so beautiful sometimes. Like this was totally unexpected when my cousin texted me. But the ish can also be full of heartache and bumps that, wow, I didn't know that was part of the plan or the journey. And I think like it's the biggest test of resilience to make a baby this way. But once I got that text, I will say, Eloise, like it was so interesting how much I knew now I'm going to be a mom. Like the text came through, it felt it deep in my heart. Like this was the, I would never have wished our journey or anyone's hard journey on anyone. But in that moment, I was like, wait, this actually makes sense that
Mm.
my cousin, we look alike. We've always been called like twin cousins. Not that you have to look like your surrogate at all,
Sure.
by the way. But like we've always been similar beings. Our dads escaped Hungary together. And I know you've read the article in People magazine about us. Like my dad was born in hiding during World War II, at the end of World War II in Budapest. My grandmother delivered my dad underground. And as a Jew, you didn't want to be caught. His grandparents were killed. Like a lot of family were killed. And my cousin's late father was younger than my dad. And when he escaped communism in Hungary in 1956, my dad was a young kid. He was 13. He carried my uncle, Alana's dad, on his back out of the country on foot. And again, past a lot of dead bodies and a lot of trauma. But when Alana offered, I said to her, it's amazing that my dad carried your dad on his back and now you got my back. Like this is a circle of life story. And she said something really powerful, which again is in that People article, but she said, this is an opportunity for me to help try to rebuild our family, because our grandmother that we shared, my dad's mother, had so much trauma, lost so much. She lost two baby boys, lost so much family, and was traumatized by that. And my cousin was like, let's do this together to start like a new chapter of our family tree. And I just knew it was right. It was like, wow, this is powerful. So
Yeah.
it's the greatest thing. And Ariel, is named after our grandmother now. Not the name Ariel, but she has another name that is named after my grandmother Judith. And yeah, she's with us and it's great. It's amazing.
Mm. And I mean, we started talking before we I started recording of just how things are supposed to happen
Mhm.
exactly and well, how things happen is exactly how it's supposed to happen.
Mhm. And that, by the way, when people used to say that to me, I wanted to slap them because
Yes.
it's like, I'm suffering, don't tell me that. But now, no, I've always felt that way. In fact, when early on in the journey, people kept saying, you're going to have the child you're meant to have, you have to hold on to that. That was helpful for me, actually, because I'll never know all the babies I never met that I loved. But this daughter I have of mine was so worth the wait. Like,
Mhm.
she's amazing. So, yeah, if any other thing had worked, I wouldn't have Ariel. That's a weird thing to
Mm.
think about.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've given some
Yeah.
excellent TED Talks and written so much about relationships. I'm curious about talking about the unsexy part of trying to conceive
Yeah.
and how that may impact your relationships.
Yeah, I write about that a lot because, it's not sexy
Mm,
trying to so lovemaking and baby making right away are different whether or not you're struggling. It's just a different vibe, right? When you're tracking your ovulation and you're trying to get it on as in a heterosexual couple. Like, that is already not that sexy, but it could still be romantic because, "Oh, we're gonna be parents." But when you strip away the romance and you're now on hormones, you're now going through like trying to recover after the grief of a failed embryo transfer or miscarriage, anything this community faces. And then you're told by your doctor to have intimacy, and it is hard. So, one of my biggest tips for couples struggling to conceive is to remember your lovers and partners, not just people trying to make a baby. And to
mm,
hook up when you're not fertile is really important. Like, so to
mm.
really like say, oh, guess what? I want to see you when I'm not fertile. I want to have a date night when there's no chance, because then we alleviate some pressure and we find that space to see each other in a way that's so important that gets lost. So that's one of my biggest pieces of advice, but also to like give yourself some grace when you're like bloated on the meds. Sometimes you like don't kick yourself if you're not in the mood. I mean, come on. Like
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
hard. If you
Yeah.
need to like pull up with some french fries and a Netflix and chill, go for it. I mean, I don't think you need to turn your sexy on all the time, even if you feel that pressure.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. And I think too that a lot of times women are the ones who kind of bear like all of the weight of holding on to that whole infertility umbrella, right? And one of the things that I like in Pregnantish is that you've incorporated men and
Mhm.
their experience with infertility as well. Can you talk about what men go through and the male role and infertility issues that we do not hear about really ever?
Thank you for asking that. It's obviously as a woman, I can talk about it as a storyteller and as a journalist. I've interviewed so many men at this point in navigating this, both with partners when they're not the ones with the medical infertility diagnosis and those who have male factor infertility. I've interviewed both. And men are 100% in on this journey and often left out of the stories. And we made a commitment day one of pregnancy. So we were the first media site in the category.
Mhm.
So we were the first platform saying, we're not going to be like, when we launched Pregnantish, the only place to find infertility content and modern family building content beyond like clinics and WebMD and Resolve, with the great places. But as a media platform, the only place to find it was parenting outlets, which is very triggering when you're going through this.
Yeah.
So we dedicated this space to like people for whom sex does not make baby, but they want to have babies, singles, couples, LGBTQ, and men were in our welcome video, as were singles, as were so many people who are left out of who needs to be served in this. And we also made a commitment back in 2016, 2017 to diversity and storytelling, way before I will say it was in vogue to do this, because it
Mm,
is the right thing to do. But we did
mhm.
this from consciously, intentionally for the last 6, 7 years, because we did not want the same image of what infertility looks like that we had seen all over, morning shows. By the way, I've been on many of these morning shows. I'm glad they're running any content. So it's no disrespect to them. But there's so many people, and I know Eloise, you're passionate about that too,
Mhm.
that you need to serve who are touched
Mhm.
by this. And
Mhm.
so that was part of our commitment. Men are writing us a lot of DMs today on the Pregnantish podcast. Actually, I know this will air later, but I will say, like, we did a whole spotlight this week on men, on male factor infertility, and we're running the story of a couple. She's a Paralympic champion in a wheelchair. People assume her name's Mallory Wegman. People assume she's infertile because she's in a wheelchair. She's on the US swim team in the Paralympics, but it's her husband who's able-bodied, quote unquote, and is the one who had the infertility issue. So we have to turn on its head that men are not impacted.
Yes.
So that's important. But I think everybody, there's so many left out people. Parents are left out. Like, my mother admitted to me one day, like, she was mourning when I was losing she didn't wanna tell me this,
Of course.
but she wanted to be a grandmother. It was heartbreaking to watch me, who she loved, and my husband, who she loves, suffering, and she felt like there was no one to talk to in her friend circle because they all had grandchildren and, like, look, we don't know what they were going through behind the scenes, but this extends to everybody in your village,
Mhm.
like, everybody.
And it extends to everybody in your village if you're also willing to share. I
That's
think
right.
the other thing too is that there's still this stigma regarding infertility and people not willing to share what they're going through. And rightfully so. You don't necessarily have to share. But in that same vein, it's also of if you don't share, how do you release?
Mhm,
You're just gonna keep it bent up. If
mhm,
you don't share, if you don't express, if you don't release that pain, it's going to stay in there and fester.
mhm. There's an old expression I always like, which is, "If you bury secrets, you bury them alive." And what happens is they come out and they manifest in much less healthy ways sometimes. So, grief is a hard thing to face.
Mm.
But if you face it in a way that honors your experience, and sharing might not mean broadcasting it on
That's
Instagram. I mean,
right.
share it, right? It could mean like telling a close friend, telling a stranger who you just trust. Like, it doesn't matter who it is. But I totally agree with you not to keep this bottled up with everybody because that can be suffocating.
Yeah, for sure. So, can we talk about Pregnantish and talk about I mean, you've shared why you created it, but when somebody goes there, what is it that they can expect to receive from it?
Oh, that's a nice question. I mean, I think like when we launched what I want, I would answer it differently because when we launched, all I was looking for was premium content that was fact checked, that was written with, we have professional editors and writers in our network. And my video team comes from, I used to host for the Oprah network in Canada. Like, they come from like great media backgrounds. And I was like, we need to elevate the storytelling. That was my mission number one. And promote education, destigmatize this through storytelling. But what's come out of it is this vibrant, robust community of people on this journey and also providers. We serve a lot of providers, healthcare providers, who are just as committed as I know you are, Eloise, to creating these healthy babies and being
Mhm.
part of the village. And we can't make a baby without you guys. So, like, being our next phase of pregnancy is bridging the gap between patients and providers. We're starting a national survey in the next month or so. We ran probably, we think, the largest study ever on patient retention a few years ago on why patients leave or stay with a fertility clinic. I've spoken at many fertility conferences on this. We were published in the journal Human Reproduction, so it's pretty cool for us to be scientifically published. But beyond just like the bragging rights of that, what
Mhm.
that really showed us was, oh my gosh, this is a pain point. People are dying to get their voices out. We need to like beef up our insights here. We need to do more research to really reflect the voice of today's patient and provider and to bridge the gap. We are making a baby together. We're on the same side. Whenever I
Mhm.
used to coach couples, I would say it's not us versus them. It's not you versus him. You shouldn't win an argument and feel good about that. You're on the same team. Like,
Yes.
you're
Yes.
so
Yes.
as people on the same team, we need to bridge this gap. And sometimes it's really a communication issue where a patient might feel like the provider doesn't care. We know they care. We know that this is not why you're being underserved. Sometimes it's moving so fast. The big business of fertility sometimes is moving so fast. And sometimes it is transactional. Let's be honest. There's a lot of money in this field.
Mhm.
And some people are not, I always joke, like, it sounds like I'm on The Bachelor. Some people are not in it for the right reasons.
That's right.
Right. And so we need to bring the humanity back to the making human process. And we'll do that through data storytelling, research, and community and advocacy. And I'm a relationship, at the end of the day, Pregnantish is a relationship platform that has other capabilities.
Yeah.
But we are the relationship stakeholders in this category, we feel. And there's a lot of work to be done there. So
Yeah, there is. And I'm glad, very happy to hear that you guys are working on that because one of the common themes that has been happening over and over and over again, even with what we're experiencing at Family Inceptions,
Mhm.
is parents that are talking about their patient experience and the lack of, quite honestly, patient experience, and people wanting to jump ship from one location to
Yes.
another
Yes.
location, and why they want to. They don't feel like they're being taken care of. They don't feel like they're
Yes.
being heard. They don't feel like they are getting the actual quality of service that they really deserve. And, when we sit here and we talk about, you need to advocate for yourself and you need to speak up for yourself and you need to, and so patients are starting to do that.
And that's a wonderful news, and I totally agree with you. We did this survey reaching over 1,000 patients. 33 years old was the average age of the survey participant and had gone to so many clinics over a number of years. And we know clinical outcomes probably aren't as great when you keep hopping around. First of all, you lose time. You're now working with someone who's trying to catch up and do a protocol and doesn't know you yet. Like a lot of what they're doing in art is art. Like
Mhm,
if a good
mhm,
provider is doing art,
mm,
tweaking. Not all providers do that, but it's hard when people are jumping around so much. I went to so many doctors over my 8 years. So we don't want that. And 49% of respondents in our survey left because of a relationship themed issue, not because the treatment didn't work. That's fascinating. So
mhm,
that's why we want to create change to improve this gap. There shouldn't be a gap. And I think until the big business of fertility gets that, we're going to have a problem
mhm,
because, the doctors, the nurses, the embryologists, all these people are there for beautiful reasons. Like a lot of, like you, Eloise, all of these people in the industry got here because in your heart you felt you can make a positive difference and it was core to who you are and your values, your identity. And then there's like certain people who have come in who just sniff a money trail.
yeah,
And I get it. It's lucrative, right? But it's short-sighted for the industry who comes from that to not
mhm,
realize that the patient's providers are going to start to feel burnt out when they're treated like a number and not like a human. It's really problematic. So
right.
I know we both feel strongly about that.
Yeah, and not only that they're not being treated like a human, but at the end of the day, what you're coming to those professionals are for the most important thing and most important being in your life,
That's right.
knowing that that is also not paramount in their minds on
Mhm.
your behalf can be quite frustrating.
Absolutely. And, in terms of, and you, of course, at Family Inceptions, you're working with not only intended parents, but you're working with people helping serve the intended parents.
Mhm.
Also, they're misunderstood.
That's
Our
right.
next study, we're really looking at third party reproduction in our national survey coming up on the journey because they're sometimes also treated in a transactional way. So to make the decision to be a donor, a surrogate, to make the decision to undergo those services as an intended parent, you're not buying a cupcake. I
That's
mean,
right.
like,
That's
I
right.
always say that, like, it is not an easy jump for people. Now, it might be in their hearts to do these things, but there is a very emotional, spiritual, sometimes financial some journey. And serving the whole human in that will make for a better relation for everyone. So I really believe data will wake up certain players
Mm.
because without the data, like we could say this till we're blue in the
Yep.
face, but once we show, no, actually, you're going to lose someone because of this,
Yep.
then that starts to click. And oh, yeah, now I'm losing money. It's
Yeah.
not just.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not just the
Yeah.
right thing to do, it's
Right.
a better
That's
business
right.
idea.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So my final question, which kind of just alluding to what you just said, I read that you have said that infertility is not just a medical journey. It's also an emotional, relational, financial, physical, and spiritual one. How has this been a spiritual journey for you?
well, definitely what I shared about my cousin was extremely spiritual. To feel a connection to my our grandmother was, to me, sparked something that was deep in my heart that I hadn't consciously thought about. Like the trauma my grandmother had over babies was real. Delivering my dad underground and hiding, scared she was going to be caught and murdered. I mean, talk about trauma. I can't even imagine that. So I think this spiritually has connected me to my family. I think spiritually it's connected me to something outside my own experience. I often joke my story is boring compared to the million all the stories we serve at Pregnantish are so fascinating. And on the podcast, we tell these incredible path to parenthood stories every time. And my jaw is on the floor. I'm just constantly like, this is such extraordinary content and very meaningful content. And to me, yeah, this has really allowed me to look beyond my own experience and see how connected we all are through this, how these stories can help others feel less alone. When we launched Pregnantish, Eloise, people told me to hire, like, now it would be Chat GPT, but like,
Oh,
don't
Jesus.
write real articles, don't write real essays, hire cheap labor overseas. I was like, guys, you don't understand. For me, content and what you're doing on the podcast as well, content is the pathway
Mm-hmm.
to education, to
Mm-hmm.
community, to
Mm-hmm.
advocacy. Content is a pathway to connecting dots for people who are overwhelmed. If you're undervaluing content, you don't get it. And if content is also served in a way that's sloppy and transactional, and you're not going to capture this reader and their deepest pain point and their deepest dream. And
Yep.
so it's very spiritual for me.
And content is something that your daughter and my daughters and other people's sons and other
Mhm,
people's children, they will one day potentially need this information.
mhm.
So why not use your pain to be able to try to hopefully prevent them from having to endure the same thing? So that
Mhm.
content that we're putting out right now is not just for the here and now.
That's right.
Granted, things will change and it will evolve, but at least we're giving them a foundation of where to start from. Because for a lot of people that were dealing with infertility years and years ago, like you said, why you started Pregnantish, there was nothing. There was nothing for you to seek out to gain any kind of knowledge from, and you had to figure it out on your own. And
Mhm.
I'm sure every parent doesn't want their children to endure what they had to endure.
Absolutely agree. And I think, the other day on Pregnantish, we shared the Empire State Building where I live, New York, Orange for infertility awareness. And it was so emotional for the community to see it, this iconic building, recognizing this was very moved our community in ways. It's been shared now over 200 times across the world in the last 48 hours from Brazil and Asia. Like, we're seeing it pop up all over the place, thanking a building,
Mhm. Yep.
an iconic building for seeing me, right? You
Yep.
see me.
Yep.
So things are shifting. We're raising like the frequency
Yep.
of this, and it's only going to benefit, to your point, future generations, I hope.
Yes, exactly. Andrea, thank you so much for being on the show with me today and sharing your experience and for all the things that you are doing. And obviously, we'll be sure to have the information for Pregnantish on show notes. So thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much for having me. It was great to be here.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this episode helpful, please rate Fertility Cafe on your favorite listening platform and share this episode with anyone you think could benefit from hearing it. Tune in next week for another amazing episode on Fertility Cafe. Until then, remember, love has no limits. Neither should parenthood.